After the demolition of the World Trade Center, most Canadians have become just as gullible as their American counterparts. And, well, let's just say that the best way to enslave people into accepting a police state is to have them believe that it's not even happening at all. After September 11, 2001, our Prime Minister at the time, Jean Chrétien, suggested that the 9/11 attacks were a result of Western values. You mean like our freedoms? Well, then I guess that joke is now becoming a saying. And if they hate us for our freedoms, then why should they be hating us anymore? It's been 13 years since the September 11th attacks. Fortunately, many people are realizing that the US-led Western governments have built a world empire, and that it is precisely their foreign policy that causes hatred of the West all around the world. Canadians, too, traditionally known for our peaceful relations abroad, now cling to this idea that peace can only come through military aggression. And this is just the way that it's been under Stephen Harper, but even past Liberal governments have intervened abroad, and it's likely now that Harper has set a new standard in aggression that will be repeated by his successors. This is just what we've seen in the American experience, most recently with the transition from George W. Bush to Barack Obama in early 2009. And I mean, just consider everything that the Canadian government has gotten away with since the attacks of September 11th, 2001. We're basically mimicking the old Soviet policy in a never-ending occupation of Afghanistan. But of course, the Soviets were trying to liberate women and children and bring prosperity. Canadians are there to, liberate the minorities and bring prosperity. Whereas the Russians were trying communism, we're attempting this through crony capitalism. Both invading forces used the pretext of democracy and freedom, and both forces brought nothing but destruction. And where has Canada been since Afghanistan? Well, we helped the American governments with Libya, Syria, and even Iraq, and now the Islamic State, which the West has helped to arm and fund. And now, apparently, our freedoms are under attack. Well, since 1945, when have mine, Canadians, or Americans' freedoms been at risk? Has it been at risk from the communists? Well, no, communism was a backward system with the inner contradictions. Economists like Mises and Hayek knew that it would eventually fail. Has it been from the drug war? Well, no, most drug users are marijuana users, and cannabis is just as dangerous as tomatoes. The only real threat to liberty comes from the drug-related gangs, which is a result of the drug war, which the government created. And it is the same with the war on terror. This is a war that has been started by US government's actions around the world. And now add on to that the surveillance state, the NSA, the FBI, CSIS, the RCMP, or the Five Eyes program that share information around the world. The biggest threat to our freedoms is the state itself. In every conflict since World War II, Canadians and American civil freedoms have only dwindled as government power continues to expand. The war machine has become an institutionalized aspect of society, not just the factories that make the bombs or the training camps that train the murderers, but we're also seeing the cultural obedience to the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, after 9/11, Canadian Parliament passed the Anti-Terrorism Act. This act gives police, judges, and other bureaucrats the right to conduct secret trials and preemptively detain suspects. And once you've been labeled a terrorist, you no longer have any rights. Canadian politicians actually used to attend Sikh parades, and they would make appearances with the Tamil Tiger supporters. In 2009, WikiLeaks released the MIAC report, a government document that labeled Ron Paul supporters and opponents of the North American Union as domestic terrorists. And the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, better known as CSIS, had once listed on their website those of us who are anti-globalization as potential domestic terrorists. Law enforcement on both sides of the border have the same foes as they do friends. But can any of this be justifiable? We were attacked on 9/11, so the story goes, and all this is a result of 9/11. So then, what exactly did happen on 9/11? Well, first let's examine World Trade Center Building 2, or the South Tower. At 9:03, what was later reported to be United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the building, causing asymmetrical damage. After 56 minutes of burning, the building collapses. As it begins to collapse, the building tilts to the side and continues its angular momentum into the dust. Yet, despite this asymmetrical damage and collapse, the entire building disintegrates. The ground view of the collapsing tower clearly shows a symmetrical collapse, and all this happens within about 10 seconds, which is close to free fall speed. This brings up a major problem identical to the problems faced in the World Trade Center Building 1, or the North Tower. And despite over 90,000 tons of structural steel and over 180 million pounds of reinforced concrete, both buildings fall as if there was no resistance. And one does not need to be an expert to understand the basic laws of physics. In the case of the North Tower, we're led to believe that the top 20 floors crushed the bottom 90. Well, this is impossible. The top portion of the building should have met resistance. Instead, what we saw was the top 20 floors collapse and bring down the entire building with it. Both buildings collapsed through the path of greatest resistance. Within 5 seconds of the collapses, both buildings had reduced to half their mass. The buildings appeared to have just completely torn themselves apart. So what force could have been driving this destruction? Gravity follows the path of least resistance. And not a single floor can be found at the bottom. Both buildings were completely reduced to dust. In this dust, traces of thermite incendiaries can be found, and in some dust samples, even unexploded bits of this stuff have been found. Pools of molten metal are found at the bottom under the debris, flowing like lava, say some of the first responders. And then there's Building 7. World Trade Center 7 collapsed without any airplane crashing into it. The 47-story building fell later that day, shortly after 5 p.m. It had around 40,000 tons of structural steel, yet it falls in about 5 seconds. Like the previous two collapses, Building 7 looks like the common type of controlled demolition. The victims' family members have made a commercial asking for a new investigation into the collapse of this building. As you can see, these facts alone warrant at least a new investigation. Unfortunately, Canadian authorities don't have much power over their American counterparts. Yet we do have the power to withdraw from Afghanistan and the other occupations around the world. So we need to educate ourselves about this event, which continues to affect us to this very day. If you haven't seen it yet, and even if you have, I would suggest you re-watch some of the footage in my film, The Toronto Hearings on 9/11, and ask yourself if these events look like gravitational collapses. There are over 2,000 professional architects and engineers that demand a new investigation. So it's time to cast off the taboo of 9/11 truth. The evidence for an inside job is overwhelming. So don't be a closet truther. Study the facts and challenge the opinion molders. We've had 13 unlucky years of an aggressive warfare state and marginalization of 9/11 truth. So it's time for us to enter this into the mainstream. People are getting war weary right now. And the minute that they start to question the event that led us down this road to tyranny, the sooner we can start taking big steps towards liberty. So be sure to check the links in the description to where you can watch the Toronto hearings on 9/11, and also to where you can support the filmmakers by owning the 6-hour-long DVD. Also be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and also be sure to check out the new website where we'll be having more video reports coming very soon to pressfortruth.ca.